Why is your Mustang still in violation? That's what Cheryl from the HOA screamed at me, waving some ancient brass key like it was Excalibur, claiming it let her open every lock in the neighborhood, including my car. Yeah, that happened. Problem was, the key didn't fit my Mustang at all, so naturally, she called the cops. And, of course, my little brother Ben is the county sheriff, masquerading as official HOA business. What would you do in my shoes? It all started that sunny Saturday morning. I was washing my midnight blue Mustang, thinking about what Ben always says. Know your rights, but try to handle it yourself first. Most HOA problems dissolve when people understand the law. I really wish I'd called him before Cheryl Morrison strutted up my driveway. Clutching her brass key and looking like a warrior queen, her laminated HOA badge swinging from her neck. Good morning, Ethan. Time for your mandatory vehicle compliance inspection, she declared. Show me where our bylaws grant you access to private vehicles. My tone was firm, confident, backed by law, not ego. She waved her laminated badge, insisting her presidential emergency access gave her the right to open any vehicle for community safety verification. The scratches on my Mustang mounted as her composure cracked. Sweat formed on her forehead. Her authority facade began, crumbling in front of a growing audience. Neighbors, joggers, even Mrs. Patterson across the street watching with her morning coffee. Cheryl's desperation grew with every failed twist of her key. Her accusations became louder, less logical, and more frantic. I realized this wasn't just confusion. This was a full-on power trip masquerading as emergency protocol. I started recording on my phone. Documentation prevents, he said, she said. Ben always says. I calmly announced I was recording for legal protection, warning her that her actions were trespassing. She ignored me completely, lost in her delusion, proving the scratches and witnesses were all the evidence anyone would ever need. Meanwhile, the crowd grew, neighbors now fully invested in this surreal Saturday morning drama. Then it clicked. Cheryl's obsession with master access wasn't just overreach, it was personal. Morrison Development, the original community builders, could she be claiming legacy authority through family ties? The question hit me like a bucket of cold water. She ignored it, pulling out her phone to call 911, claiming I was obstructing emergency compliance protocols and creating a dangerous situation. The lies rolled out smoothly, almost admirable in their creativity, turning my legal assertion into a perceived threat. By now, 8 neighbors had gathered. Margaret Sullivan, our oldest resident, shook her head knowingly, clearly seeing through Cheryl's narrative. Catherine Mills, the retired teacher with a relentless eye for evidence, was also observing. My calm explanation to them highlighted Cheryl's overreach. Vehicle interiors are private property, state law protects them, and the Fourth Amendment backs me up. Soon enough, the cops arrived. Officer Martinez, young and earnest, and Officer Coleman, seasoned and skeptical, began sorting fact from fiction. Coleman immediately noticed the key didn't match my Mustang's modern lock. Martinez questioned Cheryl's supposed emergency access papers, spotting impossible dates and contradictory documents. My own research and HOA bylaws showed zero authority for vehicle inspections. Suddenly, Cheryl's fabricated rules were crumbling under scrutiny. Even her pivot to demanding a $75 compliance fee revealed fraud and attempted extortion. Each document she produced conflicted with real regulations. Every story she told had holes big enough to drive a truck through. The officers systematically dismantled her claims, proving her federal emergency narratives. Fire safety priority zone assertions and supposed vehicle inspection authority had no basis in law. At home that evening, I discovered a professionally printed citation demanding $375 for noncompliance, confirming what Catherine and Margaret had suspected. Cheryl had been systematically exploiting residents, targeting vulnerable families and elderly neighbors, using fear to extort money and assert non-existent authority. Her fraud stretched back months, using her HOA presidency as a cover. Margaret and Catherine helped me compile historical documents and photographic evidence, showing Cheryl's systematic overreach, attempted entries into cars, door-to-door misinformation, and intimidation of residents less likely to challenge her. She had built an entire narrative around Her personal vendetta and self-inflated authority, manipulating neighbors' fears about safety, federal mandates, and property values. The ultimate test came at a community meeting. Cheryl had turned the room into a mock federal briefing, projecting enlarged photos of my Mustang and other vehicles, claiming federal emergency access protocols were being violated. I challenged her directly. "Can you provide federal documentation?" She waved it off, claiming bureaucratic delays. Margaret and Catherine provided evidence showing Sunset Grove had never been a fire safety priority zone and had standard residential locks, no master key system. Then came the live demonstration. Cheryl attempted to use her brass key on my Mustang in front of 40 neighbors. It didn't fit. She forced it anyway, leaving visible scratches, sweat forming, confidence melting under public scrutiny. Ben arrived as sheriff, maintaining full professional detachment. Federal authority, filing false police reports, and attempted breaking and entering. Evidence from multiple neighbors and documents confirmed systematic criminal behavior over months. The HOA board held an emergency session, removing Cheryl from office, rescinding her fabricated regulations, and establishing clear legal oversight for future governance. The neighborhood slowly began healing, with educational sessions led by Margaret and Catherine to prevent future abuse. Cheryl's so-called master key was revealed for what it truly was, a common brass key, used as a prop to justify her fraudulent schemes. The sound you hear now isn't broken locks, it's justice being served. I learned that defending your rights, even against a delusional authority figure, requires patience, evidence, and persistence. Sometimes the hardest battles preserve the most important principles. So, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? Share your thoughts. How far would you go to defend your rights when someone abuses power under the guise of safety? After that Saturday showdown, the neighborhood was buzzing like never before. Everyone had seen Cheryl's act, the scratches on my Mustang, the failed master key fiasco. It was like a live soap opera, and I was trapped right in the middle. But the real work had just begun. I couldn't just shrug it off. Her little vendetta had stretched far beyond my car. She'd been targeting multiple neighbors for months, exploiting fear and misunderstanding, and I knew that if I didn't act, more people would fall victim. Margaret and Catherine became my de facto task force. Margaret with her decades of community wisdom, Catherine with her meticulous records, GPS timestamps, photos, and digital evidence showing Cheryl systematically trying doors when owners were away. It wasn't random chaos. It was organized, methodical, and designed to look legitimate. And now that evidence was in my hands, we started calling every longtime resident, piecing together a timeline. Turns out, Cheryl had been collecting compliance fees from families for months, elderly folks, immigrant families, anyone she thought wouldn't challenge her. She claimed each payment was to comply with her emergency access protocols, ranging anywhere from $150 to $500 depending on who she was targeting. People were scared to say no because she invoked safety and federal compliance, which, of course, didn't exist. It was infuriating. The audacity, the scale. And yet, even in the middle of this, I had to maintain my composure. Ben's advice ran in my head. Document everything. Evidence is your shield. Don't let emotion drive the narrative. I spent the next few days cataloging every call, every document, every photograph, every falsified notice she'd posted, every door-to-door threat she'd delivered. It all went into a binder, into spreadsheets, into organized digital folders. Thursday night came, and Cheryl had scheduled a mandatory emergency safety meeting at the community center. She transformed the modest room into what looked like a Mustang's lock modifications endangered first responders. I raised my hand immediately. Cheryl, can you show any federal documentation confirming these protocols? Silence. She waved it off, claiming it was still being processed. Margaret and Catherine jumped in, calmly presenting authentic historical HOA documents proving no such federal requirements existed, no master key system had ever been installed, and no board approvals for vehicle inspections were ever made. Then Catherine dropped the bombshell, photographs and timestamps showing Cheryl attempting entry into neighbors' vehicles while they were away, every Tuesday, during school events, random weekday afternoons. The images were undeniable. each attempt paired with a badge flash, a rehearsed claim of authority, demonstrating that this wasn't emergency access. It was harassment and attempted theft. The room fell silent. Murmurs of disbelief spread through the crowd as the gap between Cheryl's narrative and reality became obvious. Cheryl's confidence began to crack, but she tried to maintain her act. She pulled out her brass key, insisting she'd demonstrate the federal emergency access procedure on my Mustang. That's when Ben arrived in uniform, calm and professional, his badge gleaming, carrying documentation for proper verification. He stepped into the center of the room and requested a live demonstration. Cheryl, unaware she was facing the one person capable of dismantling her entire scheme, inserted the key into my Mustang's door. It didn't fit. She forced it anyway, leaving visible scratches while Ben and everyone else watched in stunned silence. Ben addressed the room officially. What you've witnessed tonight is not federal emergency compliance. It is attempted theft, systematic fraud, and misrepresentation of authority. He went through her documents, showing the impossibilities, dates that didn't exist, federal agencies that never issued such directives, non-existent statutes, and confirmed that Cheryl had filed multiple false reports, claiming authority she didn't possess, and had attempted unauthorized entry into private property. The community. For any future regulations affecting private property, educational sessions were established, teaching residents about actual HOA authority, property rights, and how to identify potential fraud. Margaret and Catherine led these efforts, ensuring the community understood the limits of governance versus individual rights. In the end, the so-called master key was revealed as nothing more than a common brass key, no emergency access, no federal authority, just a prop for months of fraud. Justice had been served, not with dramatics, but with documentation, patience, and community collaboration. And the lesson became clear: standing firm, knowing your rights, and relying on evidence can stop even the most elaborate abuse of power. The neighborhood began to heal. Trust slowly restored, and the community learned a critical lesson: never accept authority at face value, and always verify before compliance. And me? I realized that defending your rights sometimes comes with personal cost, but protecting them is worth every scratch, every false accusation, every sleepless night. So now, I ask you, what would you have done if faced with Cheryl's elaborate, months-long scheme? Would you stand your ground, gather evidence, and fight, or quietly pay to avoid conflict? Share your thoughts, because in situations like this, the difference between chaos and justice lies in action.